This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
Thank you all very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you're very welcome to the Institute of International European Affairs this afternoon. My name is Alex White. I'm Director General here at the Institute. It's my great pleasure to welcome you if you're here in the room, and indeed, if you're watching us online, you are equally welcome. I just have a very short task to really to say hello and to say how pleased we are in the Institute here to be working in particular with the Embassy of the Netherlands on preparation and now the delivery of this really important event, exploring and debating a really critical question for the country and indeed internationally. So I want in particular, I'm not going to go through the panel because our distinguished chair, Simon Coveney, will do that shortly. But we have a really stellar panel, a great spread of experience and insight, I'm quite sure. Really pleased that Simon Coveney has agreed to chair the session this afternoon. Simon, former Taoiseach, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Defence. As I said to him earlier, Minister for Agriculture when I knew him first. Terrific to have you here, Simon, again, and look forward to the discussion. But before we hand over to Simon to introduce the panel and to moderate the discussion, I'm really pleased to invite Ambassador Van Koldum just to address you, to say hello, and then when she is done, perhaps Simon can pick it up from there and we'll enjoy the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director General White. Thank you very much. I'm going to be extremely short because all I say takes time from the panel, and the panel is what is most important today. I take the floor to express my gratitude that we as Embassy can team up with IAEA. It's a wonderful cooperation, and I also am happy to see colleagues here in the room and many other people. What we bring together is politicians, diplomats, journalists, experts, academia. So that is what we would like to discuss. And the fact I'm told that this is a very popular event, that shows there is a huge interest in the topic, and that may be a reflection of an increased sense of urgency. And that is also something that we very much feel. We're going to speak about hybrid threats. Some of the threats become less and less hybrid on a daily basis. When I think of the drone excursions that we had recently in other EU countries' airspace. So we are really very happy to be here in Ireland and to team up with you. There is this EU slogan, stronger together. In this particular area, it's very, very true. It's true in many areas, but in this one also factually. So we are here to learn, to team up, and to prepare ourselves for what we need to be prepared for. Thank you.
Simon.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm not surprised, as Alex said, that this is one of the busiest events that the IEA has held in a very long time. We have a waiting list to be here, and we have a lot of people watching online. So my job is to try to keep the debate focused and the discussion focused, and to take questions so that we can get as much out of this session as we can. But first of all, can I just thank the Dutch Embassy and the Ambassador in particular for her initiative in ensuring that this event takes place, because this is a partnership between the Dutch Embassy and the IAEA. So, and I think it's also a reflection of how other countries are thinking about the challenges that Ireland faces from a security perspective in the context of the vast infrastructure that Ireland has a central role in observing and protecting into the future. Let me just share some facts before I introduce you to our esteemed panelists, because I'm not sure there's a more qualified group of people than the panelists we have today to discuss this topic, and I'll explain why in a minute. But first of all, just for those of you who are getting your heads around this topic and this issue, there's about $10 trillion a day of commercial transactions that are facilitated by undersea cables every single day. There's about 1.7 million kilometers of those cables around the world. The most focused intensity of cable activity, if you like, is transatlantic. And about 75% of all transatlantic cables that are carrying all of this commerce and communications activity every single day either come through or very close to waters that Ireland is responsible for. Most of those actually don't come on shore to the island of Ireland at all. And so this is international infrastructure, some of which connects Ireland, that we undoubtedly have in the new world of security and defense and resilience and threats that we are now living in that we need to take very seriously. Secondly, Ireland is planning to invest an enormous amount of capital in offshore infrastructure over the next 2 decades. We have a commitment to build the capacity to generate about 37 gigawatts of electricity offshore between now and 2050. And we need the capacity to ensure that that is secure infrastructure in the future, which will predominantly be funded by the private sector. And thirdly, 85% of all of Ireland's gas, which essentially fuels a lot of our economic activity and energy in Ireland, comes through 2 interconnectors linked from Scotland into Ireland. And so this economy, this island, and our people are extremely vulnerable to potential threats to that core infrastructure that surrounds our island, both internationally from a reputational point of view, because it's other people's infrastructure too, and indeed our own core interests here. The final thing I'd say is that Ireland in many ways is the data center of the world. It's certainly one of them. We have the highest population of data centers per head of population for most of the world. We have, close to 90 data centers across the country now, and we're planning to build a lot more. Tens of billions of euros of expenditure to actually shape and design the new economy that Ireland is going to thrive on the back of in the decades ahead. And again, that is going to need maritime connection through cables in the future. So I just wanted to emphasize the point that this is our future we're talking about. This is Ireland's international reputation we're talking about. And the reality is that undersea infrastructure really is the arteries, if you like, of global commerce today. And Ireland is uniquely exposed and potentially vulnerable in the context of the new threats that are undoubtedly clear and present in today's world. We're seeing that in the Baltic, where there have been a number of deliberate sabotage incidents where cables have been cut. We've seen pipelines exploded under the sea. And we see other parts of Europe in particular coordinating a significant response capacity in terms of both observation and protection. And so Ireland needs to be thinking along those lines too. And so we have a panel of people today who I think not only can assess the threat and how real it is, but also can assess how Ireland should be responding in terms of the lessons we can learn from other parts of the world, and indeed the multilateral response that Ireland needs to be part of in the context of the infrastructure that I refer to. And all of that is underway, I'm glad to say, but we have people who are literally at the coalface of both observing that and making it happen. So the first person I want to introduce is Commodore Edward van der Schuren. I hope I'm pronouncing your surname, probably not well, but Schuren, I think. So Edward is the program director for the protection of North Sea infrastructure at the Dutch Ministry for Defence. In other words, he's facing the kind of challenges that we're facing here too, and I think can share a lot of his experience. We will then have Jackie McCrum, who is the Secretary General of the Department of Defence, has led the Department of Defence now for a number of years, and she'll talk to us about the new Maritime Security Strategy that is being put in place and the extent to which we have linked with international partners in those efforts. We'll then have Vice Admiral, now retired, Mark Mellett, former Chief of Staff of the Defence Forces, the first naval officer ever to lead our Defence Forces, and now, of course, a chair of MARA, and deeply interested in, from an academic perspective as well as practical perspective, marine ecosystems and, of course, marine infrastructure. And I think Mark will give us real insight. And then finally, we have Dr. Camino Kavanagh, who's a senior fellow with the UN Institute for Disarmament Research and is also a visiting senior fellow with the Department of War Studies at King's College London, and is a genuine expert in this space and has provided a lot of support and advice to the UN Secretary General's office in relation to this space as well. So top quality people available to us today. We're going to ask them to speak for between 5 and 7 minutes each. We're going to hold questions until they've all spoken, and then we'll take questions for about half an hour or so from the audience present and also from those of you who are watching online. So can I ask Commodore whether you'd speak to us first? Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, it is truly an honor to be here today at this event on protecting critical offshore infrastructure from hybrid threats. This gathering shows how important it is to share knowledge, to listen to each other, and to face our challenges together. So thank you very much to invite me, and thank you to giving me the chance to speak and to join this important discussion. Our oceans and seas are vital. They give us nature, they provide us food, they carry global shipping and fishing, and they shelter pipelines and cables. When I joined the Navy many years ago, I learned to check my sea chart before dropping anchor to ensure the safety of the offshore infrastructure. The last few decades, this offshore infrastructure has become the backbone of our way of life. It powers our homes, it connects our economies, and it links our people. Today, my work focuses again on protecting offshore infrastructure, but this time not to ensure the safety, but to ensure the security, because the world has changed. Geopolitical relations look very different than 20 years ago. New threats, new technologies, new vulnerabilities, and many of them come together in our waters. Like Ireland, the Netherlands is rapidly expanding its offshore energy production. By 2050, we expect more than 25,000 wind turbines at sea. Our ambition is to get 70%, 70, of our energy requirements from offshore installations. This makes protection of our offshore infrastructure more important than ever, and due to the geopolitical threats, more urgent than ever. And we are not alone. Our neighbors around the North Sea face the same challenges. That is why close cooperation is essential between governments, between public and private actors, between nations. This meeting itself proves the point. Shared challenges demand shared solutions. Let me tell you a little bit about the Dutch approach. Key to our program is the whole of government approach. My own role shows what it means. I am from the Ministry of Defense, but for this job I am seconded to a civil ministry, the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, to run an intergovernmental program. By doing it this way, we combine both the military and the civil perspective. And we do more. We work hand in hand with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Economic Affairs, Justice and Security, and with the Ministry of Climate and Green Growth, as we call it. By joining forces across all these departments and actually assigning people of all these departments to my team, I can use the full expertise of our government. Our focus is clear. Work closely within the government and with private partners and international allies. Improve our awareness and understanding at sea. Strengthen the resilience of our offshore infrastructure. Improve both risk management and crisis response. And clarify who is doing what when our offshore infrastructure is threatened. And how does that look in practice? We invest in additional surveillance capacity for the Navy and Air Force and for our Coast Guard. We place new sensors at sea, above and underwater. We work with private partners like wind farm operators, to share data and host sensors on their platforms. We prepare for crisis with new government-wide crisis plans. And we practice together through exercises that bring all partners to the same table. Another major step for the Netherlands will be the foundation of a National Maritime Security Center. And this will be a hub, a place where the government, including military and civil services, and private partners come together. It will collect data in one place, it will analyze in one place, it will give us a clearer picture of what is going on at sea, and it will allow us to act faster and more efficiently and effectively. And as I like to say, security is our purpose, protection is our promise, resilience is our shield, but cooperation is our weapon. That is why today matters. That's why we share knowledge, to deepen our understanding and to take the next step in protecting our offshore infrastructure. This is not only a call for cooperation, this is a call for action. Now, more than ever, we must stand united, national and international. This event gives us the chance to put offshore infrastructure at the center of our attention. By exchanging knowledge and sharing experience, we strengthen our alliance in order to become more resilient against hybrid threats, state and non-state. I look forward to the discussion today. I look forward to hearing your ideas, and I look forward to building stronger cooperation together. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Now have Secretary General Jackie McCrum, who I think doesn't need introduction from most of you in the audience.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the IIEA and to Simon for hosting this event and providing me with this opportunity. The Netherlands is situated in one of the world's busiest maritime regions, and I very much appreciate the Commodore's valuable insights and the opportunity to learn from his experience. As an island nation, we are reliant on our critical maritime infrastructure. Undersea cables in our waters carry a significant portion of transatlantic internet traffic and financial data, while approximately 75% of our natural gas supply, as we said earlier, is imported via subsea pipelines. This reliance creates vulnerabilities to disruption, whether from state-sponsored hybrid attacks, cyber threats, or accidental damage. We can observe an increasingly volatile geopolitical situation, highlighting the vulnerabilities of our critical undersea infrastructure. Indeed, as you know, Russian intelligence vessels and vessels of the Shadow Fleet have been seen in our waters. In last year's Defence Policy Review, maritime security was identified as a key priority. This new focus was driven by the assessed threat level, our geographic position, and our responsibility and commitment to support the security and defence of Europe. In addition, our most recent national risk assessment, which my department coordinates on a whole-of-government basis, identified damage to undersea infrastructure as one of the 22 key risks for the country. As a result, my department has taken on responsibility for coordinating maritime security and will lead on the development of the new National Maritime Security Strategy. A new maritime security unit has been formed in my department, leading on this work, the first time such responsibility has been assigned in the state. To support the development of this strategy, we conducted a public consultation over the summer. The purpose was to encourage an open, constructive dialogue and to build consensus on the risks, challenges, and opportunities facing Ireland's maritime domain. This public consultation received significant engagement from a wide range of interested parties, including responses from government, academia, industry, and members of the public. The submissions received indicated that there is strong support for the strategy's development. There's also a very clear understanding from the public of Ireland's most urgent maritime security challenges, particularly the growing threats to critical undersea infrastructure. We also detected significant support for international cooperation to improve maritime security. The protection of critical maritime infrastructure emerged as the foremost concern, reflecting its vital role in Ireland's economy and security. Additionally, the need to safeguard against global instability enhance our situational awareness by increasing Defence Forces capabilities, and strengthen international and domestic cooperation was widely emphasised. Analysis of the submissions is still ongoing, and the input gathered will serve as a critical foundation for shaping a robust and forward-looking National Maritime Security Strategy to ensure Ireland is well prepared to meet current and future challenges in our maritime domain. Interestingly, the views received from the public are similar to the feedback we have received when discussing preparations for the strategy with subject matter experts in government departments and state agencies. Considering this feedback, the focus of this new strategy will be on enhancing maritime domain awareness and on ensuring the protection of critical maritime infrastructure. Developing regional partnerships and boosting international cooperation in order to increase maritime security will also be a key concern. Given the nature of the maritime domain, we understand that Ireland will have to look to international partners to truly support this new approach. In support of this, we have undertaken extensive outreach to identify and explore opportunities to cooperate with our neighbouring countries and with international institutions such as the EU and NATO. This significant international engagement has allowed us to access examples of best practice and to learn from the extensive experience in monitoring and protecting critical maritime infrastructure that many of our neighbours have developed. Other things my department has undertaken in support of this strategy's development includes the Advanced Research Workshop on Underseas Communications, Cables and Crisis Management that we delivered in collaboration with Iceland's Defence Directorate and with the support of NATO's Science for Peace and Security programme. The department also sponsored the inaugural Valentia Island Symposium on Subsea Cable Security and Resilience, which brought together Irish and international experts from industry, academia and government to address critical issues related to submarine telecommunications cables. I'm glad to see that our key collaborator on these projects, Dr. Camino Kavanagh, is part of our panel today. Another example of a project that will support the development of the new strategy is the Taoiseach's early approval for the Defence Forces to participate in the EU's Common Information Sharing Environment. This marks a significant step forward to support better monitoring and surveillance of growing threats at sea and to improve the Defence Forces' maritime domain awareness. It will aid decision-making during complex maritime operational scenarios and will support the sharing of information with other EU maritime organisations. I also wanted to highlight the programme of work focused on subsea domain awareness capabilities that my department is developing. This programme includes investment in sonar capability for the Naval Service. This capability will be used to detect objects near cables and pipelines in Irish territorial waters and the exclusive economic zone. This new acquisition will enhance awareness below the surface, contributing to the overall maritime picture available to the Naval Service and the wider Defence Forces. In addition, a civil military project team has been established in my department to progress the military radar programme, and I can assure you that good progress is being made. The programme comprises of 3 elements: land-based long-range primary radar, ground-based air defence systems to include a counter-unmanned aerial system capability, and maritime radar. When fully delivered, the recognised air picture will incorporate this suite of military radar systems, which will have the capability to detect all aircraft traversing our airspace, including any that may be operating with transponders turned off. Further capability projects within this programme of work are also being progressed. I also want you to know that my department has been organising and coordinating exercises aimed at enhancing the whole of government response to emergency scenarios, including hybrid attacks with a maritime element. As part of the planning processes for these exercises, we have collaborated closely with the Helsinki Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats. Their expertise has been invaluable in developing realistic scenarios for these exercises and in assessing the outcomes to ensure continuous improvement. To conclude, the development of our National Maritime Security Strategy represents a proactive step towards safeguarding our maritime domain against current and emerging threats. The protection of Ireland's critical maritime infrastructure is not just a national priority, but a shared responsibility that requires collaboration and sustained investment. By leveraging international partnerships and enhancing our situational awareness and deterrence capabilities, we can ensure the resilience of our critical maritime infrastructure in this era of hybrid threats. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. And in the usual military way, everybody is on time in terms of their speaking time. So, Mark, you're up next. Thank you.
I'll try and stay in time, and just to say it's a privilege to be here and great to be with the DG. But also I want to commend the Dutch Embassy for leading on this, because I suppose the father of the institutions that we use for Law of the Sea, he was a Dutchman, Hugo Grotius, back about 4 centuries ago. And he said many things, but he, I suppose, underpinned the principle of Law of the Sea, Mare Liberum. And for 4 centuries, that has held us in good stead. There were other things he said, by the way. He said that we could envisage a forest being denuded of birds and a river being denuded of fish, but that would never happen in the case of the oceans. How things have changed. The oceans are challenged now in terms of fisheries. But I think as we came towards the end of the late 60s and early 70s, the chair of the drafting committee for Law of the Sea, Sir Alan Beasley, said that Law of the Sea was in a state of disorder, bordering on chaos. And we then, in the years that followed, had one of those most remarkable international institutions, the Law of the Sea Conventions, UNCLOS. And that has stood us in good stead up to now. There are some countries that have yet to fully embrace it, but it is a framework from which we can move forward. But what has, I suppose, it has governed has been, or has provided a framework for, is our oceans, recognizing that they really are the lifeline to our economy. 90% of our trade by volume travels by sea. All our energy, and most of our energy, comes through interconnectors in the case of this state. A huge amount of our food comes from the sea, either in fisheries or actually in terms of imports. And a lesser known fact is actually the only reason we're having this conversation is that the ocean has been the resilience that has actually corrected climate change to this point. It's absorbed 90% of the excess heat and 30% of the excess 40 billion metric tons of carbon we emit every year. So we now look at the issue in terms of infrastructure. And Simon, you mentioned the subsea cable infrastructure, and Ireland has an extraordinary resource in terms of the amount of cables coming through here. I think it's about 1 trillion euros of data in terms on a daily basis are conducted through cables that come through our jurisdiction in terms of where we have sovereignty or where we have sovereign rights, that is passing over seabed where the state has sovereign rights. We also have the electrical interconnectors, Celtic Link and Sea Link, some still in construction. And Simon, you mentioned the issue of offshore renewables and the future there. And like the Netherlands, we have an extraordinary ambition, and I see Noel Caniff here in the audience, for up to 2,000 turbines by 2050. That's 2,000 turbines the size of the Eiffel Tower, each individual one. And we now have this evolving situation of hybrid threats. And I think the reality of hybrid threats has been, I suppose, dawning on us for some time, but it has been there forcibly, in particular, since we've seen the invasion of Ukraine. But even before that, the absence or the activity of espionage in terms of individuals looking at landing points and cables in this jurisdiction, and the visible evidence of actors at sea, in particular the Russian Federation vessel Yantar, overseeing where this critical infrastructure runs across our jurisdiction. And we should also remember that 1 trillion euros of daily trade through those cables fires an extraordinary engine of our economy, our FDI engine, in terms of the multinationals, the Facebook, the Googles and all that are centred in this jurisdiction, and to keep those powerhouses in terms of our data warehousing going. The reality is our current governance system is quite fractured in terms of how we address the oceans. Multiple departments have an interest, up to 20 sectoral activities relating to governance at sea. And I think for many years, it has been reactive and actually siloed in terms of a response from a national point of view. But I want to commend the Department of Defence for putting their hand up in terms of leading on the Maritime Security Strategy. That was leadership. Somebody had to do it. And I will say, in my career as a naval officer, it was quite frustrating to see who was the competent for security in the state. And it was very difficult to identify that. But I think there are steps beyond that we can look at in the context of the importance of the oceans today. I would go back to the time of Charlie Haughey and the Department of the Marine vision. We need a Department of the Oceans. We need a cabinet subcommittee on the oceans, and we need to recognise how important and how intertwined we are in this state on the oceans. We also need to see that this is not just a single department or multi-department issue. It's a whole of society issue. It's about government, it's about the market, and it's about civil society, and pulling those all together And I do remember, in fact, one of the first major operations I was ever involved in as a young naval officer was 2 tons of narcotics. And the person who came to welcome me or congratulate me on that seizure was not from the Department of Defence, it was actually Nora Owen, who was Minister for Justice at the time. So we do join up government in this country. We have the crossover between justice and defence, and we need to look at that kind of architecture from the perspective of defence, security, control, enforcement, and resilience. I think I'm at my time. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. I think that's really useful, and I know you have a lot more you'd like to say today, so hopefully we'll get into that in a few minutes. So, Camino, you're the final speaker.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's a real honor, including to share the panel with such illustrious speakers. I was trying to figure out how to approach this discussion, given the speakers that were coming before me. And I think it's useful maybe to take a step back and maybe present the findings of a recent report that I conducted with colleagues for UNIDIR, where we were looking at what it means in policy and practice when states actually consider subsea infrastructure as critical infrastructure. Now, we look predominantly at telecommunications cables, and it was really interesting to see how different countries are approaching the issue, how recent incidents are informing the transition within which many countries find themselves at the moment, and how different regions radically are different from each other in terms of the actual perception of threat and vulnerabilities. But what we did come across was a lot of alignment in thinking, and a lot of alignment in terms of how governments are beginning to approach subsea infrastructure. Now, most of the infrastructure that we are talking about today is actually built, owned and operated by the private sector. And these infrastructures are generally built with resilience in mind. So this relates to the anticipation, prevention, capacity to respond to, recover from, ensure business continuity, and adapt to changing circumstances and new events. So we broke these down into 3 different capacities, so absorptive capacities, restorative capacities, and adaptive capacities. Now, I referred to the absorptive capacities as kind of the scaffolding that you need to put in place to ensure that you have the capacity to actually think through the issues, bring about your whole of government approach, and ensure national preparedness and crisis response. And if you look at that, take subsea telecommunication cables, that means you need to have the policy, regulatory, legislative framework in place. And this goes all the way down from permitting and licensing, streamlining across the different regulatory authorities, and all the way down to kind of ensuring that your cables and your infrastructure has the right protection within your waters and so forth. It also means, from a national preparedness and crisis response perspective, that you have the national plans, structures, personnel, capabilities, and protocols and procedures in place. This includes identifying, clarifying roles and responsibilities, who has the authority to work in these areas, identifying points of contact, so industry and others know who to contact at the policy, regulatory, operational level, ensure that you have the protocols and procedures in place, and that you're exercising those regularly. And when it comes to this specific area, ensuring in relation to hybrid threats, for example, that you're also integrating elements of disinformation, misinformation into your exercises, be they maritime or otherwise. And then also ensuring system security priorities. And this becomes really complicated when you have a maritime, a submersed element, you have a subsea or a surface element, and you also have terrestrial elements, and you have cyber-physical aspects to all of these across the board. You also have supply issues, storage depots, supply chain security issues, and you can see those considerations slowly been integrated into thinking at the international level and the regional level. And you see that in the New York Statement on Secure and Resilient Subsea Infrastructure, and also in the EU recommendation on the security and resilience of such infrastructure. And then, as mentioned by Jackie and the Commodore as well, the capability needs, whether it be vessels, but monitoring, surveillance equipment, and technology and so forth. From a restorative capacity, I mean, there's a range of other issues here, but from a government perspective, that also includes identifying market failure, and where government investment may or may not be needed, identifying transparency, cooperation measures, and so forth. And then finally, just a very quick point on adaptive capacities. That's evidently doing your exercises, but ensuring that the lessons from exercises and incidents are actually then integrated back into your resilience cycle. So that becomes part of the security and resilience aspect. And it's dynamic, it's not a static process. Also looking or conducting regular risk management reviews. And then a final issue here is the diplomacy and international cooperation element. There's a whole new field of cable diplomacy emerging, or undersea infrastructure emergency or diplomacy emerging. And that goes from exchanges on international law and how it applies to the issues that we're talking about, all the way down to integrating these issues into foreign policy, diplomatic training, and so forth. So it becomes a whole of government approach. And it's one that I think we're talking about social contracts here, basically, at the national level, where government, whole of government, the communities that are affected at the coastal level, but also everybody, because we're highly dependent on the infrastructure across the board. And then industry evidently is a core element here. And I think based on the Valencia Island Symposium that we ran last year, as well as a range of other workshops, there are really good relationships emerging on that front. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So I think we have a lot to digest there. And so while you're thinking about questions, I'm going to just ask a question to each of the panelists, just to maybe get the ball rolling. So Commodore, maybe you first. Perhaps you could just give us a more detailed picture of what you have in mind when you talk about a National Maritime Security Centre, in terms of the role of the private sector, the role of government, the role of international partners. What does it look like? What scale are we talking about? Is it part of a broader NATO infrastructure? Just give us a sense as to how a National Maritime Security Coordination Centre would work.
Interesting question. Thank you very much. And actually, I can't answer that in detail because we are still working on it. And I had the opportunity to install a quartermaker, as we call it, so the quartermaker National Maritime Security Centre, who is actually looking at this kind of questions. But in my vision, as I may say that, we talk about a center on operational level. And then you have to think military, we have the strategic level, then comes the operational level, and under that, the tactical level. So the operational level, that needs to be filled in. We have the Coast Guard Center, we have the Navy headquarters. They are the headquarters and the centers who are actually sending out the boats and the aircraft, etc., etc. But on top of that, you have an operational headquarters in military terms. And we have that in the Netherlands as well. We call it the Joint Force Command. But it's only military. So what we are looking now is a civil operational headquarters specific for maritime security, which is first a data fusion center where all the picture building will be done, but not only the picture building, but also understanding what is happening. We call it maritime situational awareness and maritime situational understanding. It's nice to see a boat sailing from A to B, but you want to know, is it a normal pattern or is it different? Is it loitering over cables or is it just dropping some waste or whatever? So you need a good picture of what is happening. And based on that picture and that understanding, you can decide, is it a threat or not? And that process will be done, as we call it now, the command and control cell. Maybe it will be another word, but that is the main heart of this Maritime Security Center. And this command and control cell will decide who is going to respond on what legal framework, on what regulations, Will it be the Coast Guard, which is in the Netherlands actually a framework where all kinds of civil services work together? Or will it be a military response by the Navy or the Air Force? Or will it be the public prosecutor who is going after the ship or the drone or whatever? Or are we going to do nothing? Because we don't want to disrupt a Chinese ship, for example, sailing from A to B without any intentions. So this command and control is actually thinking, how are we going to react? Do we need to react, and who is going to react? And it will be a combination of military information, civil information, and private information on an operational level. So I hope that gives a little bit insight on what my vision is and what we are looking at.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. And I think that's also interesting in terms of the work that Jackie and the team are doing at the moment. And maybe I just might ask you, Jackie, just on the way I see this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Ireland has a lot of catching up to do in terms of capacity in a lot of areas linked to security and defence. And so I think we are committed to doing that. But in the short to medium term, Ireland's focus, I think, will be on international cooperation, both with the private sector and with other countries, in terms of protecting and securing and observing key infrastructure. Is that thinking very much part of the new National Maritime Security Strategy? And how do you think that's likely to progress in the months ahead?
Thanks, Simon. I think there's no doubt that we're coming from a low base. I think we've made significant strides in terms of the government commitments over the last couple of years, and certainly the funding is coming through as well. So we've seen significant increase in our capital, for example, in the National Development Plan. We have, with our Defence Force colleagues, we have a very strong action plan in terms of addressing those deficits and what we want to do. And we need to prioritise that based on the funding that we're receiving. The Maritime Security Strategy is a new strategy. It's the first of its kind in Ireland. And Mark very kindly gave us some kudos for putting our hands up. But we did put our hands up, and that was without any assurance that we would get resources and that we would get the support to do that. But I'm pleased to say that they have come through, and we do have a unit that has been established within the department to look at this whole area of maritime security. And what is interesting is that I think what's coming across in all of the messaging is that you need a whole of government approach. But what we have discovered is that there are probably 8 departments involved in this strategy, or could be involved in this strategy, that all have a little piece and responsibility. So I think what our job is to identify those pieces, is to bring them together, and then to look at how we can address this issue from a, as all the speakers have said, from a whole of government approach, and where we can prioritise the funding and the resources. Then, in terms of the legislation, and Mark mentioned that in terms of UNCLOS, that's interesting as well, because we've begun. The Chief of Staff and myself are working on advices for the Attorney General in terms of where we might need to strengthen that legislation. It was developed in a different time, and the threats are completely different now. So we need to look at that. I think what's also very, and we've had some really good interactions with our colleagues today in relation to the centre that they're establishing, and we can learn from these, where there's lessons learned as you've moved along, and we can hopefully learn from them, and if there are mistakes made or issues, challenges, that we can maybe avoid them in the future. But certainly key to all of this in developing a strategy is that we can't do it alone. We do need to work with partners on this, and we have had detailed discussions with the UK, France, Norway, Finland, Denmark and the Netherlands. We have visited the NATO's MARCOM, the Maritime Command Centre, both ourselves, the department officials and Defence Forces, to better understand how they protect undersea infrastructure. I've somebody in Brussels at the moment working on this week on the EU's Maritime Security Strategy Working Group. So we've got lots of tentacles out there trying to establish all this information and get the best that we can. Margaret Burney is the Assistant Secretary that's in charge of this area, and Margaret is charged with developing the strategy. They're under a very strict objectives to deliver something Margaret, I don't know why you're laughing, but deliver something by Christmas. But
No pressure.
That is the plan and the objective. And we can't, we would like to have the luxury of waiting for a long time to develop this, but we're going to have to develop something in the meantime. On the capability side, we do have a very strong civil military capability development unit, which are working together to look at what would be our priorities and what would be the capabilities that we'd require out to 2040. And again, there's plans, very strong plans underway in that. And all of this means that we have to be agile into the future. We can't be sitting planning for years on end. We need to actually put some action into that. The military radar program is going to be the single biggest investment in defence in the history of the state. We've got the funding for that, and we have, again, very strong civil and military planners working on that. And we'd hope to probably have some further information on that, but towards the end of the year.
Okay. Listen, I think at this stage, it might be appropriate for me to give you a flavour of some of the questions that are coming in online, because I think they're really interesting. And of course, we'll take some from the audience as well. But I just want to make sure that we keep the people watching on their screens part of this conversation as well. So let me give you an example of some of the commentary that we're getting, and then maybe the panelists can take elements of different questions. First of all, Professor Andrew Cotty from UCC. A lot of attention focuses on communication cables, but there may be more redundancy there. Would greater disruption not result from attacks on electricity or gas interconnectors? Can the panel comment on vulnerability of electricity or those gas interconnectors? Well, we mentioned them earlier, but I'll ask the panelists to comment. Brian Quinn, why no mention of space-based observation techniques for surveillance? Fair question. They're essential for the wide area intelligence gathering. And with new technologies such as onboard processing, should we not be focused more on space observation? Karen Banks, how many naval vessels are currently available to patrol Irish waters, and how many will be available in 2 years' time? That question, by the way, is a source of huge frustration for people like me, for Mark, and for Jackie, in terms of the pace of recruitment that we're trying to accelerate for the Defence Forces more broadly, but also for the Naval Service. Seamus McCabe, in the current market, developers will be constrained to commit to the substantial costs of supporting maritime infrastructure protection within their development budgets. In terms of funding the new vessels, training, hardware, and human capital to adequately protect new and existing marine infrastructure, do the panel think that this is best provided through public, private, or indeed combined funding solutions? What models are available at a European level? I might ask Camina maybe if she could comment on some of that. So a lot of interest in a lot of different areas. Mark, I might ask you just to comment maybe on the on the breadth of some of those questions.
Yeah, I think the last point was interesting, and I actually am a real advocate for public-private, I suppose, investment. I do think that there is a big steep hill for the Defence Forces to climb in terms of acquisition of capability, but the speed of technology is moving so fast. I think there has to be greater recognition of the way the market can support that, and the idea of perhaps a national resource, which could be a merchant ship that has, I suppose, technologies that are autonomous, UAVs, underwater autonomous vehicles, that are also becomes a point of truth for higher education institutes, for small and medium enterprises to actually test technology. Cathix Ocean, for instance, is an Irish company with probably the most advanced AI machine learning subsurface capacity in the world. It's actually been quoted in Norway. It's been quoted by the US military. It's an Irish company. X-Ocean is a similar company. Ubotica, Embryonics are two satellite companies, one using AI in space and the other using AI in terms of communications, all Irish companies. So my point is that bridging the gap between, let's say, the speed at which technology is advancing and the need then to have defence forces that have capabilities is to look at models whereby the state could perhaps acquire a commercially operated vessel that has sea riders from the defence forces that ensures there's tech transfer back into the defence forces, but at the same time, that commercial operator is given a left and right of arc delivery of services and also gives a reassurance then to the market in terms of the cable companies and, as somebody mentioned, the energy interconnectors, and in due course the offshore renewable energy sector. So that you actually have that whole of government, whole of society, public-private. And by the way, I'm long enough around to know the success of the National Maritime College, which is a public-private partnership. It works very well. A lot of resistance when that was being stood up actually was the current Taoiseach who primed that at the time back in 2000, and it's a great success. So public-private works. But we'd still, at the end of the day, and I finish here, we need to invest in, if you like, the bulwark of defence capability on which we fall back on when things become extremists.
Yeah. Another question here, by the way, and in fact, a number of questions coming in around resourcing of maritime security infrastructure, around our limitations in terms of the pace at which we can recruit personnel and of course introduce new hardware. Jackie, do you think there's likely to be significant increased investment in unmanned technology, automation in terms of drone technology, both in the skies and undersea? Mark mentions companies like Ocean who already have a lot of interesting technology in this space. Is the department looking at, we cannot explain to the public that our capacity is constrained because we can't recruit fast enough. There's got to be technology solutions here in terms of automation, and the pace of change in terms of drone technology is something that I assume we're factoring into our plans, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I go back to just the whole maritime picture as well, that it's not just the naval vessels. We have an Air Corps squadron that are out there on our C295s. We have 2 new planes that were delivered in 2023, and they're out there every day, reviewing the EZ, and that's that combined data picture with our naval service in terms of sharing that information. So it's not just the ships that you're looking at. You need to look at that, but you also need to look at the combination. We also have a monitoring service down in Haulbowline as well, which is monitoring all the ships that are moving in the area too. So all of that combined in very layman's terms is giving us a picture there. The increased capabilities that we're going to invest in, which are sonar in the radar, we have the facilities now to do that. That procurement processes that would have been a source of frustration in the past have been accelerated because we've now got a policy of government-to-government procurement, and that's enabled us certainly on the radar program to accelerate that from what would have been a 3-year, 4-year process down to a much shortened, less than 12 months perspective. In terms of the recruitment, a lot of resources have been put into this. And we are seeing an uptick in the naval resources in terms of the increase in numbers there, which is really positive. A lot of changes in terms of the pay arrangements have been increased. The retirement dates have been moved out to 62. We've got direct entry. We're taking specialists in now in direct entry. So nothing has been off the table, and we've looked, there's private healthcare, there's a lot of benefits that have been put in place, and they've all had a very positive. We've seen a huge interest in the naval service, and it's a question of us, being able to convert them, but also to retain them as well. So, I would say that we are, from where we were in a pretty, I think, a poorer picture. I think we're in a more positive picture in terms of the unmanned vessels. For sure, that's something that we're looking at. We do, we will be identifying that through research and what is best. In fact, the Sea Lord, the first Sea Lord in the UK, was talking about in his opening address. He's just been appointed. He was talking about every vessel that would go out would be accompanied by 2 unmanned vessels. So there would be 3 at sea at any one point in time, which was an interesting concept as well. So we need to look at that, and we also need to develop, a capability that we're agile enough to put them, to acquire them, and then to put them to sea.
Yeah. Camilla, can I ask you just, we have some questions coming in that asking us to talk a little bit more about the need for the cooperation with the private sector. And in terms of your research and studies, is there a sort of a best practice template in terms of how states can interact with private sector investors and owners and managers of this type of infrastructure? Because it's clearly a theme that's coming through here. from, I suspect, people who are investing in this technology, wanting more interaction with the state?
Yes, certainly there are different ways of that governments are approaching this. You have evidently the public-private linkages that emerge through the regulatory process and the consultations that emerge around those. So that's one. But then I think in many states there's an effort to ensure a greater engagement on a more regular basis in relation to looking at threats, vulnerabilities, sharing of information that is a little bit outside the kind of the formal process that enables a trusted environment. Again, I think DICIT has been actually in the UK, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology has established, for example, an industry subsea cable working group. And they regularly come together and actually conduct exercises, design the exercises together. So they're actually informed by the industry themselves as a board.
What makes Ireland different to a country like the UK and many other countries that have that kind of interaction in relation to subsea cables that land in their jurisdiction? What Ireland has is a lot of subsea cables that transit through our jurisdiction that are owned by private sector interests. And so I think one of the challenges for us will be to try to put a consultation ongoing infrastructure in place that allows entities that own infrastructure coming through Irish territory, if you like, or open sea that Ireland has responsibility for security in, to have an ongoing conversation around how that works.
Yeah, many of those that transit through also have some form of presence in Ireland, given the data centers and so forth. So there is an interest there in some form of collaboration. And already through a range of workshops and events that were hosted over the past few years in Ireland, that collaboration is already there. And I think there is more and more engagement, including through some of the cable associations.
Okay, well, look, I've got a couple of spicy questions here that I think will make sure everybody is on the edge of their seat a little bit more, just in case the conversation's a little bit easy. So I've got questions from Lisa O'Carroll, journalist from The Guardian. Question to the Commodore. What would the Netherlands do if a Russian ship came into Irish waters and cut cables to the UK or France? Are you part of a response as an EU member rather than a NATO member? So you can just think about the answer to that question for a second. The second question then is for Mark and Jackie on drone walls. 9 EU member states are holding a meeting about this on Friday as a matter of urgency. Is the prospect of Russian drones entering Irish airspace as something Ireland can currently cope with? So they're slightly abstract, but I thought interesting questions that maybe we should put to the panelists. So I'll leave you deal with the easy one, Edward.
That's an interesting question, and I don't have the answer. But let me say something in general. When it comes to a cable through Irish waters going to France, damaged by a Russian ship, then we are talking about collective defense. And for us, collective defense is organized by NATO. So probably we will knock on the door by NATO and ask, what are we going to do about it? Because this cable is probably not only influencing our national security, but our alliance security. So my guess is that it will be mainly handled by NATO, or that we will look primarily to NATO. But of course, EU is an organization we are in as well. Although the military part of EU is not what it is as in NATO. So when you're asking for a military action, we will absolutely look to NATO. When you look to a civil reaction, EU will be probably the primary entry. But what is going to happen, that is very interesting. And maybe just to add a little bit about the question before, in the Netherlands, the underwater infrastructure is owned by private parties, not government. So we always say to the private parties, you are the first responsible for securing your cables. It's like my house. I have to pay my own locks, my own doors, my own fence. The police and the military, that is paid by the government. And it's the same for underwater infrastructure. So the first line of defense is by the owners. And it will also count for this question. So we look at the companies probably. So what did you do to prevent it? And in this kind of international context, NATO and EU will be the solution for us.
Great. Okay. I don't think we're likely to build a drone wall anytime soon in Ireland, but I think it's an opportunity, I think, for us to be reminded of what is happening and the conversations that are happening in other parts of Europe this week. Security is central to so much of the discussion within the European Union at the moment. And make no mistake, because a country may consider itself neutral on certain things, is not a protection any longer. And I think we need to be in the real world here in terms of conversation. There are arguments in terms of military non-alignment, of course, and that is central to Irish foreign policy in many ways. But does that offer a protection to Ireland from the kind of hybrid threats that are clearly present today? I think all of the evidence would suggest absolutely not. And I think it's important to say that. We've got 15 minutes left, and so I want to switch now to the audience that are present to take questions for the next 15 minutes. We're going to finish at 2:15, but just to thank everybody who's put questions in online. We've got to most of them. There was one other, by the way, in terms of our systems of permitting, which Mark, you'll know a lot about in terms of chairing MARA, but the time that it takes to put infrastructure in place in a maritime domain in Ireland is an enormous frustration for many private sector developers that are looking to help the state in terms of much of the challenges that we face. And I just want to acknowledge that question.
Can I just deal with that? We are pushing full tilt to actually deal with some of those delays. MARA stood up just over 2 years, and certainly I know Laura Bryan is here, our chief executive. This is a conversation we have almost every day. Yeah. And there is some misinformation out there with regards to the latency with regards to turning around applications for licenses and consents. There are some genuine cases, but there is also noise there. And I'd certainly be delighted for that person to connect with me. I'm available open source on LinkedIn if they want to send me their particular case.
Great, good response. Okay, let's take some questions from the audience. We have. Yes, so if everybody could just introduce themselves by name, even if I know you, don't take offense if I'm asking you to introduce yourself. Everybody else won't know you. So yes, the lady first.
Thank you. Laura Bryan from MARA. So not going to address the other. It's actually maybe a question for the commander. And I think fundamentally there's often a conflict of interest between the commercial interests of the developers of infrastructure versus maritime security, particularly when it comes to sort of marine spatial planning. So in Ireland, we have a very much a plan-led approach when it comes to offshore wind. Areas are designated where development can take place. When it comes to other infrastructure, particularly telecom cables, it's very much developer-led. So the developers decide where to go, and that's in their commercial interest. How has the Netherlands addressed this? Because there's an argument for saying you kind of designate corridors, which is then easier from a security point of view, but that's not where the commercial interests want to develop. How have you addressed that kind of conflict, and any lessons maybe that might be useful for us in Ireland?
Great question.
Great question. And how we address it, we start a discussion. And this is a discussion in the Netherlands as well, because efficiency doesn't mean effectiveness. So from an efficiency way of looking at the problem, you would probably have all the cables at the same corridor landing at the same spot. And that's what we did the last 20, 25 years. I'm not going to say where they're landing, but they're all landing in the same spot. When you look at the security, with the security glasses to this problem, you probably would like to say, spread them out as much as possible. So we have the discussion with the private partners, how are we going to handle this? And when we look at the North Sea, and my department where I'm now working, infrastructure and water management, is responsible for where are we going to put what in the North Sea. But it's not only energy, it's not only data. We're looking at solar panels. We are actually looking at data centers underwater. So we have to figure out what is safe and what is secure. And that might mean that we are not going to do it the easy way for the companies, but we ask them to do something different, which costs more money. And then you have another problem because of the geopolitical situation. Everybody knows that energy prices are rising. So we said a few months ago to these companies, keep the price as low as possible. The day after I come in and say, you have to secure them. Yeah, and they say, that's going to cost a lot of money and the price will go up. So it's a balance, like everything. And we will have the discussion, and sometimes we win, sometimes they win, and probably it will be the best solution. So
Great.
How do we address it? We discuss it.
Great. Noel, you're next. And I'll come to this man here in the grey jacket then next.
Thanks very much. Noel Cunniff, I'm the Chief Executive in Wind Energy Ireland. That's the representative body for the wind energy industry. My question's related to energy security and just a bit of context. So I think was referenced, Ireland imports about 85% of our energy supply right now across electricity, heat and transport. One of the best ways that we can improve our security generally is to improve our energy security so that we're not as reliant on actors that might be unfriendly towards European member states. The first new generation of offshore wind farms is going to enter construction in the next 3 to 4 years. The first energy will be provided in the next 5 to 6 years. And in 15 years' time, to Mark's point, we're going to have about 1,200 offshore wind turbines off our shores, providing not just enough electricity to power Ireland, but also to export to neighbouring countries and to grow more businesses, electrify our economy. I sit on a board in Wind Europe. Two of the major sources of discussion in the last 2 years have been the safety and security of subsea cable infrastructure and offshore wind energy infrastructure, and this widespread Russian-driven disinformation and misinformation campaigns that have started in Eastern Europe and are progressively making their way across the continent. There are very few discussions in Ireland on those two topics until recently. So just to applaud the IAEA for bringing it up today. But I'd love to hear what lessons could be learned from the Dutch experience, given that you are maybe 10 years ahead of us in offshore wind energy infrastructure, that we should be doing now to try to tackle that issue of rising energy prices, and also making sure that when this infrastructure is rolled out, that it is done in partnership with the Defence Forces. Thank you.
You're very popular, Edward. Give us an answer there.
I'm not sure what your question is. Are you talking about raising awareness?
What was the starting point? Is there a body that should be coordinated now for infrastructure being constructed in the next 3 to 4 years?
Yeah, okay. And now I understand. I think we had this body already in place. Because we have a lot of energy coming from offshore. So we have this platform in place. It was handled by the Ministry of Economical Affairs and the other, the Ministry of Climate and Green Growth. They have a platform with the private partners concerning energy, data, gas, etc. from the sea. But what we saw in this platform, that it was, as I said before, it was mainly about safety. And now we're talking about security. How are we going to handle that? So we use the same platforms again to handle this problem. But specific for my program, we are now working on a public-private cooperation platform, a new platform, not only for energy and data, etc., but for all the actors at the North Sea to have a new PPS, as we call it, private-public cooperation, that is samenwerking in Dutch, an PPS platform, to have a structured cooperation with the private sector and the government and developers and innovation centra to see how can we improve security, including safety as well. So if that is an answer to your question, I hope so.
So we've got 6 minutes left. We're going to cluster a number of questions if they're in the audience. This man had his hand up from the start. Yeah.
Donald O'Brien, a member of the Institute. I have questions basically for Secretary General and the Vice Admiral. Point of information, you mentioned, Chairman, that our gas imports come through 2 pipelines. As all of us know, there's only 1 point of connection in Scotland. Both pipelines go to the same place, and therefore we are very vulnerable, given the amount of reliance we have on gas for electricity. My question to the members of the panel is, do we need dry dock capability to be able to follow up on what the primary radar and the to be installed sonar systems in order to ensure that we have actual capability to go and physically investigate things rather than just identify them. And how many dry docks do we have? And if not,
I need to take questions as well now because we're running short on time.
Should we be building new dry docks or recommissioning old ones?
Yeah, good question. But any other questions? Because I just want to make sure everyone has an opportunity. Yeah, great.
Hi, Conor Gallagher from the Irish Times. Just for the Jackie and Mark. Mark, you said a few years ago that the first shots of the Ukraine war arguably were off the coast of Cork when the Russians were proposing their naval exercises there. To what extent is the presence of sanctioned Russian vessels in Irish EEZ sometimes taking bizarre routes or loitering in certain suspicious spots an extension of Russia's hybrid activity, and is it a concern for the department in that area?
Okay, good question, Conor. Anybody else now before we come back to the panelists for the last time? Yeah, there's someone with their hand up there. It's hard to see you. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Rohan Radia from the British Embassy. I'm just wondering about the public debate. Simon Coveney, you mentioned that neutrality is not a protection from hybrid threats. I think most people in the room would agree with that, but I wonder, are you winning the public argument on that? And are there any constraints to Ireland's cooperation with other countries, especially the EU and NATO, given the public debate?
Okay. I'd love to answer that question, but I'm actually supposed to be facilitating questions rather than answering them. Okay. So look, we've got three good questions there. So if there's nobody else with their hands up, let's try and get answers to them. The first is, do we need dry dock capacity, which I think is a good question. Not just in terms of offshore wind infrastructure assembly, but also in terms of some of the security questions as well. The second from Conor is in relation to the activity of a shadow fleet, which is controlled by Russia in close proximity to Ireland's EEZ and sometimes in it. And the third is in relation to the public discussion. I suspect you're referring to the ongoing debate around Irish neutrality, military non-alignment, relationship with NATO, and of course involvement in EU common security and defence debates, all of which are linked to each other, which I'm sure the panelists can deal with. So the first one on dry dock.
Take dry dock.
Well, there's absolutely a need for every square meter of wharfage, not just in terms of dry dock, but in terms of the development of our offshore energy ambitions and also the operations management that will go with that. I left a meeting earlier on with Minister Chambers, and I made that very point. We're investing 35 million in a port in Rossaville. That needs to be made multi-purpose to support not just fishing industry, but the others. In the context of hybrid, that point I made with regards to the hybrid activity off the West Coast back in February of 22, it was a hybrid act of the Russian Federation. It was linked to what was happening on the eastern front of Europe. And that's the new dimension that's there in terms of the shadow fleet. The shadow fleet is a fleet that operates in the, I suppose, the gaps between the sophistication of the law and the Sea Convention. And what needs to be done, and I think, Jackie, you mentioned this, it needs to be tightened up in the context of control and enforcement. The ships that are operating under particular codes are doing just that and not evading it. And there may be a requirement for international institutions to meet and be more robust in the context of how they deal with those. I think that my two points.
Yeah, no, I would just say as well, Conor, to your point, I think that's why we're looking at the legislation. We just want to look at that whole area of legislation, powers, enforcement. What do we do and how can we accelerate that? So we have to explore that first, do that quickly and urgently, and then take it from there. So I think what's interesting about the neutrality discussion, and I have to be really careful about where I stand here on this as well, is just that when there's a lot of debate and people get very exercised about defence when you talk about defence, and they take different views of it. When you start talking about maritime security, which is a form of defence, actually people change their minds, and you can see a different discourse happening. So And that's come through on the public consultation in terms of the support that we've got from the public for this. And that's really been an interesting exercise and will be published, as I said, in due course.
Yeah, I mean, look, just to give a very brief comment on that. I mean, I think if you are somebody who advocates for Irish neutrality, that means you also have an obligation to be able to answer questions about security. Because if you are neutral and not cooperating or not wanting to cooperate with other countries, well, then you have to put resources in your own right. In many ways, neutral countries need to spend more on defence than countries that are part of military alliances. And if you're making the other case that Ireland should be leaning in to EU common security and defence in a more active way, well then that's also an argument around part of Ireland's protection capacity needs to come from cooperation with our friends and neighbours. I don't think anyone is arguing for Ireland to join NATO. You know, that's not the argument. It's not the discussion. The discussion is what level of cooperation should Ireland be facilitating and participating in the context of common EU security and defence policy, which has infrastructure to facilitate countries that are non-aligned, like Ireland and Austria, for example, and Malta. And we should, in my view, be leaning in heavily to that in the context of the responsibilities we have in the maritime jurisdiction. And I think most people are okay with that. Most Irish people understand that, both in terms of cooperation with our closest neighbour, the United Kingdom, and also close cooperation with EU partners as well, which is one of the reasons why it's so welcome to have the Dutch ambassador central to making this debate happen. So maybe I can just finish with Camina, because I think she has the privilege of being able to stand back and looking at sort of how the world is responding to these things. Just from what you've heard in the discussion, how would you benchmark Ireland in terms of the challenge we face now and the openness to taking the necessary decisions around resourcing and international cooperation?
I think Ireland is moving in the right direction. I think a lot more can definitely be done. Many of the questions point in that direction. I fundamentally think that looking at the resilience part as well, and building up that capacity, not only in terms of engagement with the private sector and so forth, but also baking security and safety considerations into all of these new agreements that are coming up. All of these new interconnectors, the offshore, the new cables coming into Ireland or transiting, they all come with regulatory permits, licenses and so forth. And there are political agreements that need to be also made between the different countries that are connecting, at least where the interconnectors are concerned. So baking security considerations into that allows for cooperation, that allows for sharing of information and so forth. So there are different elements there that aren't just the hard security, but also can be baked in right from the outset. So I think Ireland is definitely moving in the right direction. I think the actual openness, at least from an academic perspective, that the government and pretty much all the different agencies and departments that we've worked with over the past few years, from an academic perspective, has been actually very, very positive. And I think investing more in academic exercises and workshops, multi-stakeholder workshops, I think is fundamental moving forward.
Great. Well, listen, on that positive note, I'm going to call the proceedings to an end. But thank you very much for joining us online, and thank you very much, particularly for all of you who are here first.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.